Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zipursky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Joining Michael on the show today is Jodi Daniels, who's the founder and CEO of Clover Advisors, a data privacy consulting firm. Now, Jodi's insights and content have been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Fox News, along with many others. She's also a keynote speaker and author of the book Data Reimagined. Now, although Jodi has grown this amazing consulting business and team, it took her a while to get to that level. But here's the thing, we can help you fast track your success. If you're someone who is looking to grow from, say, 6 to 7 figures, say you're feeling swamped with all the guesswork, endless hours, and those pesky slip-ups while trying to grow your consulting practice, know that you don't have to go it alone. The Consulting Success team is offering a free, no-pressure growth session call. And here's what we're going to tackle on that call. We're going to dive deep into what makes your business unique, have a real talk about your goals, and whip up a success plan that's tailor-made just for you. We're going to help you dodge those frustrating, costly blunders and save you from the headache of trying to figure it all out on your own. And lastly, you'll get the ongoing support and accountability you need. Plus, you'll get to join a buzzing community of successful consultants just like you. Because let's be honest, growing a business by yourself can be pretty challenging at times. So to book your free, no pressure growth consulting call, head over to consultingsuccess.com/grow. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit more about what you're going to learn in today's episode with Jodi. First is how to use your connections to win new business, how to create clear and unique content to attract your ideal clients, how to prioritize your workload to ensure consistent growth within your business, how to ensure you build a business and not a job, how to build out your processes to onboard new employees successfully, and lastly, how to ensure you make your engagements simple for your clients, plus so much more. Here to share with you her story and insights is Jodi Daniels. Enjoy.
Jodi, welcome.
Well, hello. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, looking forward to our conversation. So let's start off and just have you share briefly, what does Clover Advisors do?
We are a data privacy consulting firm. And what that means is we are helping companies comply with the alphabet soup of privacy laws. Some people might be familiar with GDPR. It's kind of the big popular one that got privacy in the regular vernacular, I would say. And then we have a number of other privacy laws around the globe, especially in the United States, where companies have to figure out what that law means to them. And ultimately, we like to go above and beyond just there's a law, there's compliance. We should do that. We firmly believe it's all about establishing a relationship with customers and really about building trust with customers.
And then give us a sense of how big is the company, number of staff, revenue, number of clients per year, just anything you can kind of share to give people an idea of what Red Clover is like or looks like today.
We are 6 years old. And we've gone through, it was really just me for the first couple of years. Then I had some part-time contractors. Then I had a lot more contractors. And a couple years ago, I guess it's about 2.5 years ago, I made the flip from a contractor model to a full-time employee model, and then really grew and have been scaling the company this year in 2023. So right now we are at 7 full-time people and then a couple other contractors. And I also have all the sort of support pieces pretty much outsourced, though it still feels like I do a lot. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about that. But right, I have a team who's doing finance and a variety of different marketing people and just brought someone on to help from an HR perspective. We've served, it'll probably be about 60 clients this year. And we just keep continuing to grow and scale. Our sweet spot in terms of client base tends to be the privacy teams of 0 to 5 people. That could be a really large organization or that still just has a handful of people, or it could be organization that is really small and has to take privacy really seriously.
Yeah. So just the key, I think, to hit on and reiterate is the team size focus on privacy. So you're not, just for everyone to clarify, this is not a company of 1 to 5 people. Could be a very large company, but they have dedicated people for privacy of 0 to 5, right? That's what you said.
Absolutely. Thank you for the clarification. Yes. So it is sometimes people, when they're looking, who's an ideal client, they'll say, well, I need a company that's a certain revenue size, or a company that has a certain employee count, or a company in a certain industry, and a variety of different factors. Mm-hmm. For us, we have figured out the ideal is the privacy team is 0 to 5 people. That means they have no one paying attention to privacy, and they really should, and they outsource it to us. Or they're a pretty sizable organization and they have a handful of people. They just can't get to everything. And then they come to us to help them on a variety of different projects.
What's the largest organization, not to name names, but in terms of number of employees that you've seen where they may only have 5 people doing privacy, or maybe even 0 people doing privacy? What does that look like in terms of size of company?
So I would know more from a revenue standpoint than an employee standpoint, but it honestly can be a several billion-dollar company.
Interesting.
Where they still only have a handful of people paying attention to privacy. What happens is companies tend to start with security first, and they build up the security team. Then these privacy laws have come along. And depending if you're B2C, if you're B2B, the industry that you're in, the culture of the firm, the kind of data, so many different variables, even where your customers are located, then you start to pay attention to privacy. And where and whom and how companies approach that varies significantly. I'm a marketer's nightmare because my ideal customer profile is all over the place.
Right.
It's literally who's ever been voluntold
right.
or anointed. You have to pay attention to privacy.
Okay. I want to dive a lot more into that because a lot of the things you just mentioned right now will resonate with people, and they're sharing your potential, the pain or the feeling around how to handle that when the ideal client might feel a little bit ambiguous or quite unstable, very fluid. But let's go back in time a little bit, because you started Red Clover Advisors, I believe, 2017, give or take.
That's right.
Prior to that, where you were with Bank of America, Cox Automotive, Auto Trader, all on the privacy side. So you've been doing privacy for quite some time. What made you decide to go out and start your own firm? Why did you decide to make that leap in 2017?
Well, I think, and before I had done what you just shared, I started my career at Deloitte in finance and accounting, and then a stop at Home Depot. And that's important to share because I had 4 big companies, a variety of different roles, and I was always trying to find where I fit. I felt like I was probably the kind of classic square peg, round hole, and I was never settled. I always took roles that were creating something new. So I guess the idea of an intrapreneur, which has its pluses and minuses in a large organization. And at some point, I wanted more. And for me, it was a little bit about when did I feel comfortable to make that leap? I identified a particular date that I wanted to leave by. I was also kind of see in the future. I had younger children starting one was kind of middle of elementary school, and the younger one would obviously be there soon. And I wanted more flexibility to own my own schedule. And corporate just wasn't going to fulfill that for me. I made a date, a line in the sand, and I spent a significant amount of time off hours trying to network and figure out when the right time would be. I identified a subcontracting contract, then took a couple months to even fulfill, but I didn't know that at the time. Mm-hmm. And I'm proud to say that I met my deadline. And the deadline was first day of school. And so that first day of school was my first phone call in my new role as Red Clover Advisors.
Right. Okay. So it sounds to me like you're saying that you definitely planned this. You also started to put in the work to kind of establish the new consulting business before you had even left your current role. So a lot of networking, finding a subcontracting opportunity. Take us now a little bit more kind of forward in time where you actually launched the business of school, first day of quote unquote, you running Red Clover Advisors, the first few clients. So it sounds like the first actual client was a subcontracting kind of project. Where the actual first client that you kind of quote unquote owned, or, you had direct contact with that wasn't subcontracting, where did they come from?
So they came from actually around the same time that I announced I was leaving. That it was an attorney I had worked with who was in an outside firm in a prior role. And she said, I have this client and they're really looking for help. I left at the time where US companies were starting to pay attention to GDPR. I'd like to tell you I was so fortuitous and left and knew that that was going to happen, but I really didn't. I just kind of said, I'm done, and I left. And then it was one of those, when you have an opportunity, you take advantage of it. That was then, it was in the digital media space. I had experience in the digital media space. I helped that company. Then I continued to just build relationships. And what was the next major pivot was in communicating and reaching out to different people that I knew. Some of them were a bit strategic. Well, you're running a company. You might have a soft spot for a fellow entrepreneur. You also might be working with companies and might stumble across privacy. Let me just inform you what I'm doing. And that particular person said, we're getting a lot of questions about GDPR. Can you help with that? Sure, absolutely. And we then proceeded to create a blog series that then turned into a webinar series, which was actually one of the most popular YouTube videos on GDPR at the time. Didn't know that was going to happen. In fact, I didn't even know for almost 10 months it was even on YouTube, which would explain how so many people kept finding me. But as a result of all of that content and the webinar, people did reach out, and I created a number of different clients from there. And it was kind of the snowball effect after that, where I just continued to network and build the relationship. And the first year was probably half subcontracting, half my own. And then the following year, it was maybe 25% subcontracting, the rest my own. And then subcontracting was probably only for about 15 months, maybe 18 months at most.
Yeah, I love a lot of what you just shared. I mean, this is classic. It's part of our clarity coaching program. We work with consultants when they're looking to get their marketing up and running. And one of the first things that we do is we call it network reactivation, which is essentially what you were doing, right? You were reactivating your network. You're letting them know what you're doing. And then the other thing that you talked about that you did is also something that we're very big believers in, and that's content and IP, right? So you are creating content, you are sharing your expertise, right? You're demonstrating knowledge and giving value at the same time through the webinars, through the blog posts. This is classic stuff that people often don't lean into enough, but when they do, right, good things usually start. So that's fantastic. Let's now hit the fast forward button. Take us today. So you're now several years into the business. What's working best from a marketing lead generation perspective? Like, how do you fill the pipeline for new clients and new business at the company today?
A couple different ways. Let me lean in on what you just shared, because the content piece, I believe, is very important. I was competing against other firms, and at the same time, a lot of people didn't know who I was. I did privacy in a company. Okay. Well, so who's this Jodi person? I needed to make a name. I needed to build my own brand. And I very thoughtfully didn't always want it to be Jodi, which is why the name of the company is Red Clover Advisors. I do a lot of content marketing. I'm also in a field, and this is probably true for much of the audience, where what you do is really special and niche and not always understood by everybody else. I love education. It's an area that, again, I had to kind of convince people why they had to pay attention to privacy. It's often one that's boring. It's compliance. It's confusing. They don't want to pay attention to it. I needed to convince otherwise. For me, content was blogs. Also, any type of webinar or conference that I could get in front of, I would. And sometimes people wouldn't always do the little ones, but to me, the little ones feed the big ones. And it's just a continuous perpetual up cycle. Then a couple of years ago, I started a podcast as well to help create content, to help fill the community, get to know other people. And honestly, the podcast, you might find this as well, but for me, I'm filling it with people who could be potential clients or potential referral partners. It's a B2B podcast. I'm putting great content out into the universe that is helping companies and other privacy and security professionals and business professionals and marketing professionals. And at the same time, I'm building relationships with each one of those people all along the way. It was a very thoughtful approach that I did 3 years ago. The next step to that was a book. Another anchor for credibility and thought leadership was to create a book. So I wrote a book. Fun fact is my podcast and my book are co-hosted and written with my husband, who does not work in my business, but we share the other side of experience. I'm privacy. He has security experience. That's a whole nother conversation. But the book and the podcast, people will listen. And I have had people come that way and say, oh, I've heard your podcast. I've heard your book. I like your content. There's tons of articles on our website. All of it kind of helps from an SEO perspective. So cold leads. Also, if someone was referred, now there's validation and credibility, which brings to the where else are the referrals coming from? They're coming from old fashioned word of mouth referrals. that I've curated with specific relationships. They might be software providers. So what software is in my privacy space that people are using? And I've built a great relationship, no different than many other softwares out there. Someone needs to implement them and use them. And then also, who else could be referral partners for me? That might be some law firms. That might be some other cybersecurity firms or marketing agencies. And each of those have been very specific relationships to help feed the funnel on my side.
Yeah. So I got a couple of questions for you and I appreciate you kind of breaking that down and going into more detail because there's just a lot of powerful stuff inside of that. I think massive opportunity for so many people, whether they're, newer to consulting or they've been consulting for some time, but they want to get their business or the pipeline to the next level. All the things you just talked about can really help with that. So the counter, I'll play the devil's advocate for a moment because I think many people feel this way at one point or another, which is that all sounds great, Jodi, but I don't have time. I'm just busy delivering on projects. So share kind of your mindset, how, and also just maybe approach to writing articles or having your podcast or speaking when you don't have necessarily a ton of resources. You're your earlier stage in kind of your marketing or the business, and you're actually, delivering on projects. How do you think about fitting all that kind of stuff in and making sure that the marketing still happens, even though you're busy working on projects?
A couple thoughts. The first is it's an investment. I look at it as it's an investment of time and money. If I've hired someone to help me do any of that, I'm looking all from that investment lens. The other is, there's a great quote that says, entrepreneurship, if you think you left the 40-hour job to just work 40, instead it's the 80-hour job. And there's kind of some truth to that, because if you want a lifestyle business, like a true just be able to work and have a job, then you can kind of go gig to gig and build a few relationships to be able to get that. If you really want to grow a business, and for me, I wanted to grow a business. I didn't want just Jodi to have a job, because then all I've done is I have a job, which is great and lovely. But then at the end, I have nothing to show for it other than I just have a job. So I wanted to grow a business. And for me to be able to do that, I again had to really make that investment. And if you don't spend any of the time on business development, what happens is you have the very classic cycle of up and down. And that brings a different form of stress. In my opinion, people have to dedicate some amount of time to business development, and people do business development different. Some people love going to lunch, and that's great. I don't want to spend 2 hours going to lunch. For me, I'd rather spend 2 hours on the content, but to someone else, they might see I've just gone to lunch. I'm looking at it differently. And I definitely am working a huge amount of time all over the place. But again, that's because I'm trying to grow this business and grow this brand. And it's however much you put in, you're going to get a little bit more. You don't have to put nearly as much as myself or anybody else, just a little bit, and you're going to get significantly more reward than if you do zero, right? Just a little bit of effort to be able to do that. And I know a lot of people find the stress of that up and down. And if I do no marketing, that's, I don't know the word, but stressful. And so if you're able to spend a little bit of time to kind of keep planting the seed, then if you plant enough seeds, then they're going to start sprouting. And that to me is the other way that I look at it. I have to plant lots of seeds, and then the good pieces, when appropriate, because they never all come at the same time, are going to sprout.
I've personally found that over the years of building this business, that the number of hours that I spend, like I think back to my early days, and I would burn the midnight oil, right? I would start maybe working much earlier, or I would still be working much later. And today it's very different. As the team has grown, as we have more systems, more processes, it's not that there's any less to do. I just find that I'm able to create better kind of boundaries around when I'm going to be working and when I'm not going to be working. What's been your experiences? Have been similar, or do you think about it differently in terms of how you're spending time in the business?
There's always, in my mind, the in the business and on the business. And many people will say outsource the things that are not in your sweet spot. Some people will tell you certain dollar amounts. I'm kind of the adage of what am I really not good at, and what would be a better use of my time. And it's taken time for me to get to that in all places. For example, I just started with someone to handle some HR items, because now I have kind of a team of 8. That's a lot of people. And I want to also make sure I have in place what they need. So as a result, that was a recent one. But in full honesty, I've I don't want to enter anything into ADP payroll. Long ago, I probably should have had someone help me there. Finance was one. I'm a former CPA, really familiar with that, but I don't want to do my own books. I'd rather have someone who knows how to do that. So again, for me, I found the pieces and I have identified who's really good at that, because while I could learn it, do I really want to? And is that the best use of my time? Where am I best? Jodi's best talking to clients and talking to companies and speaking and educating. I want to do as much of that as possible. And it's been hard to kind of give things up. That's a probably pretty common business owner control type scenario. At the same time, I have a team, and you mentioned processes. You have to be able to build the processes, and they change every time you bring someone new on. What works for one doesn't work for two, that doesn't work for six. And we're continuously evaluating that. Those processes, though, do start to let you remove yourself from those things. You've communicated the brand, the mission, the values. You're that strategic advisor, and then you can start to spend your time where you really want it. So I pick and choose the clients that I really want to have hands on keyboard kind of aspects, because I find I don't want to be too far removed. Part of what I think makes us special is I really understand the delivery and the content. I want to work on some clients, so I do. But then the on part of the business is, where am I best suited? And every time I make a hire, and we can certainly talk about how to make hires because I've made some bad ones. But when I find the right one, it is magic, and they get you, and you can do so much more. And again, it doesn't feel like the cost, because they're doing what is amazing for them. You're going to get the benefits and the reward. And now you can go and do something to make up for their cost and more.
Yeah.
And you're probably happier.
Oh, 100%. And I think on the hiring piece is interesting, because for those that are newer and haven't done much hiring, they're almost paralyzed by the fear of making a bad hire and thinking about all the potential kind of negative impacts or downsides of that. But the more hiring that you do and the more kind of business you've built, you just know that's part of, like, making bad hires and things that don't work out is part. Nobody gets 100% success rate when you hire people. But as you said, which I think is so important, that when you find the right person, that makes up for all of the time that you spent, working with people that were not a good fit. I do want to bring us back to, you talked about selling privacy, marketing privacy. It's not the sexiest thing. Most people don't wake up going like, oh, I just can't wait to tackle that privacy thing today. You and your team probably do, but right, your clients likely don't. So a lot of consultants are in a similar situation where, whether it's privacy or compliance or just something else that their ideal clients aren't necessarily thinking is key to their business growth. What have you learned about that? I know you've already talked about the importance of content and doing the podcast and blogs and speaking. Is there anything else that you learned in terms of how you approach or how you think or how you position to sell and to market something that isn't considered that sexy?
Yes. First is making it simple. I will share, I have hired a consultant on a particular topic in my organization, and they haven't made it simple. They're incredibly knowledgeable, and I can tell that, but the communication and the process and everything about it isn't simple. Now, when you get the person on the phone, super pleasant, lovely. I can tell why this was a great referral. What we try and do is to make it really simple. We try and make the process, because a lot of times for complicated or boring topics, people just find it overwhelming and they want to avoid it.
Right.
And I feel, well, okay, that's fair. How do I get you to realize it's not going to be so terrible? Is it going to be the process? Is it going to be the language? Is it going to be the words? Is it going to be the actual deliverable that we're giving you and how it's a step-by-step approach?
Can you give me an example of that? Because I'm just trying to figure out, I want to really see and understand. So I get that you're saying you make it simple. Can you offer, maybe for everyone who's joining us, one thing that you do in your process or in your approach that you feel just really exemplifies how you make things simple and that is effective for the client?
Sure. So first is, we have created, just take any process that you have. We're going to have a discovery call. We're going to send these types of assessments to you. We're going to ask you questions. We're going to prepare a report. Just even the idea of explaining the process is simple, where I didn't use too many fancy acronyms and jargon and language that every industry has. We remove as many of them as possible. And then every single piece of paper or digital paper, goes through the lens. If I'm the customer, does this make sense? If I'm the customer and I read this, could I use it without the person explaining it to me? We just did a cookie audit. Here's an example. The deliverable was going to be, we went to a website to determine, everyone listening, I'm sure you've seen cookie banners before. They're not all created equal.
When you said cookie, I just admit the first thing that came into my mind was an image of a cookie. And I was thinking, like, did you work with a cookie company, like a bake?
I love cookies. They're my favorite food. But here we're talking about digital cookies.
Right.
And everyone has probably gone to the internet and seen a cookie banner pop up. Well, those cookie banners are not all created equal. They're supposed to be set up different ways depending on where you are. And we will then do an audit. So for this company, we did an audit to determine, do they have it set up the way they want and the way it's supposed to be? We took some screenshots of here's what's happening. In the bottom of it, we always made sure that the finding was really clear of here's what's supposed to happen. Here's what's actually happening, so that the page stood alone without someone actually having to explain it. And even now, hopefully, how I explained a cookie banner, I didn't go into explaining, well, in the EU under GDPR, it needs to be this way. I just said they're not all created equal. They're a little bit different depending on where you are. Really simple language, because most of the time the person on the other side doesn't know all the nuances. If they do, we kind of step up the language a little bit more. So those are a few of the examples. But the other piece that we do, I think actually ties this together, which is that we're always putting it in the context of how it helps their business, which is above and beyond the specific parts of privacy. So for example, the rule is in Europe, you need to have an opt-in cookie banner. No cookies can fire, or no pixels can fire, no cookies can drop until everyone says, I accept. That's the technical definition. I probably lost half the people listening. But from a business standpoint, that's the compliance part. So if we use some specific language, if we have, let's explain the different kinds of cookies. Here's some tweaks that we can do to help more people opt in, because I know that's what your marketing team wants, business company. Let's help tie to what the business goals are of the company. Let's help tie to what is important to you. And then I'll help you with whatever our specialty is. In our case, it was opt-in cookies. I think that's a really big differentiator, because then everyone wants to earn more money and save money. If you have something that doesn't directly do either of those, you have to indirectly figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah, those are two really great examples. So the first that you, just as a bit of a recap, it's kind of like, here's what you're currently doing, but here's what you should be doing. And to me, when you think about like building furniture, or you get something, you need to put it together, they'll often have a little image that shows like, don't do this, but do this, or like, the X and the check mark. So this is it's almost like that kind of application, but in the world of consulting and advisory, which is just so easy to understand. So I think that is really, really great. And then the other one is this, I think consultants are very prone to go against, or not to, I should say, to neglect, is always put things in the business case. And especially if you're in an area that is more scientific or maybe isn't as business focused. Some people think this also in the nonprofit world. They think, well, it's not about money. A business case, there's always something that the buyer really cares about that's going to get them to take action, or to feel more excited about making that investment and doing more work with you. So what I'm hearing you say is figure out what that is, and then make sure that you connect whatever work that you're doing to that, so they see a very clear path to having a better kind of outcome and impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, because I saw this on your website, you have an offering, and I couldn't actually see the page. It wasn't loading for me at that moment properly, but it's like a do-it-yourself for small business, right? Because your focus is not on the small business, but you have an offering for small business. So again, I couldn't see what it was, but I'm wondering, because oftentimes consultants will have the same desire, where they real focus is working with more established organizations. And then one day they go, wow, but I know there's so many people out there that could benefit from my expertise, but they can't pay me the 10,000, 50,000, $500,000, whatever it is. So maybe I should create a course or something small for them. But they don't usually understand what it takes to, like, the building it is not the hard part. It's how do you actually market and sell it effectively? And then how many of those units do you actually need to sell in order to equal the value of just one client? And where's your time best focused? Just walk me through your thoughts on that and your experience of having some kind of offer for the smaller market.
Well, I have the same thoughts as you just described, right? How can you package this all up and be able to leverage and scale and do all those things? The reality is that the smaller business does not care enough about privacy to make that worthwhile. And more importantly, if they did, there's not enough of the repeat to be able to maintain it. So there's buy this and then really see you too often. What was happening were that smaller companies were finding me. And I did still want to be able to help them. And I wanted to be able to try and package up what we had in a manner that would support them at a budget that they could have. I made a very conscious decision after a lot of exploration and time and energy that the small market's not the right market. So I'm not marketing. I'm not doing anything related to that at all. It's kind of just there as a little bit of the good, better, best concept. Right. And the few people who have come along who really are smaller organizations and want something that can help them and get started.
Makes sense. Today, we're in a world where there's a lot of uncertainty, recession, interest rates, wars, conflict. There's a lot of stuff going on right now. How has that impacted your business, if at all?
It really hasn't impacted my business, which I'm going to knock on a lot of wood right now because I feel really grateful. Yeah. I think I'm a little bit of a risk averse person. So sometimes I feel like, oh my gosh, look at this huge team. And then other times I feel, look at all the other things I could have done and I haven't done. From a recession standpoint, if you remove people on a team, then the company still has to comply. There's still a lot of laws and companies still have to comply. Compliance will certainly feel a dip. People might not spend as much, but they're still going to need to do something. And I actually feel like we're best positioned because the model that I've built is to go after the organizations who don't have those big privacy teams, but they still have to do something. They likely didn't get a full-time budget for a person. They still have to do something. And we're kind of set up to very specifically either project work or ongoing retainer work to kind of be that fractional fill in the blank, right? Fractional privacy work. So for us, I think we're in a really good place. Fantastic.
I do want to come back to, you mentioned you could share some of your learning around making bad hires or what you've taken from that process. But so let's just put that to the side. We're going to come back to it in a moment. Before we hit record today, you mentioned that there was something going on that wasn't like it was a lesson learned, mistake, whatever you want to call it, but you were laughing about it. And we're not going to get into what it is unless you want to talk about it, but that's certainly not the idea. I just want to understand, how do you think about when things go wrong? And I know, like in my case, in an earlier business, just anything like that popped up could really feel kind of gut wrenching, have me start thinking about all these other things, go down rabbit holes. It becomes a really big distraction. You start questioning yourself and all that. And I've developed, as the business has developed and so forth, I have a very similar kind of reaction to you, which is like, okay, I don't know if I laugh about it, but it doesn't hold me back. It's like, okay, that's just an opportunity. Like we just need to fix it and we'll keep moving. How do you personally think about that when challenges come up, when you lose a client or just something negative or could be viewed as being negative pops up? How do you kind of work through that?
I didn't always used to be this way. The business has certainly changed me. I think if I were to lose a client and it was because we did something wrong, I would take it very personally because I really take significant pride in the brand and the work that we're doing. And I'm thankful to say that clients we have not kept have been more because they've chosen to do the work internally. So that's good news. In terms of all the different types of mistakes, some of them really eat me. We're not going to talk about one, but there's one right now that is burning me inside. And I will never let it happen again. And the short version is I trusted an organization to do something. I trusted that this is what they were going to do. It was not in my skill set. So I started to question. Their answers didn't really make sense. We've now parted ways. I should have listened to my gut a long time ago. I should have brought someone else in to really kind of look under the hood, unfortunately question them. And the learning is I'll never not have a specialist along the way or just take them at their word for what they're doing. I will be much more in tune. And then in terms of some of these types of mistakes, maybe it's because I've been doing this now for a while and I know that so much of what we're doing is right. It's kind of just the cost of doing business. I had someone who would say they would make $10,000 bets. They would try something for $10,000. And if it didn't work, they'd move on to the rest. Some of my mistakes have been a lot higher than $10,000 mistakes because I tried something and it didn't work, or I trusted an organization and it didn't work, or I didn't know all the questions. And part of this is you don't always know all the things until you do it. I bought a house a long time ago. And if I think back to the Jodi in her first house compared to the Jodi who's now owned a couple homes and been in a home a lot longer and done more, I know so much more. I know more what to ask all the different contractors and all the people who come through than I did before because I just have experience. So I don't always love when people say it's experience, but it kind of a little bit is.
Yeah.
It's just you have to kind of go through it and appreciate that you've bought yourself experience.
I think that's a great way to frame it. I often, when I talk to people about this, I give the example of any multi-billion-dollar well-known brand, and you think about all of the issues that pop up when you talk to those companies, whether it's on the phone or you go to a retail location. Like there's issues and problems everywhere, even with the biggest companies that are generating. So it's like if they have billions of dollars and they're that successful in their household names, but they still have issues. There's issues and problems and opportunities everywhere. So we're no different, right? All right. So let's now come back before we wrap up. I do want to get a couple of thoughts from you on what have you learned with bad hires? I mean, you talked about kind of an experience here of bringing in maybe somebody externally and that didn't work out, trusting your gut, getting a bit more specialist support for something like that. What about internal hires? Are there just a couple of things that might maybe kind of stand out for you around that you could share?
I think one of the pieces is sometimes that you might not know exactly what you need until you do have a bad hire, because then you really learn, oh, I thought I wanted this skill set, but actually what I really needed was this skill set over here. And you didn't know that. Mm-hmm. And then on the next hire, you are building upon it. So it's trying to be as clear as possible what you really need. And I think there's soft skills and I think there's technical skills. And if you're outsourcing anything that yourself have been doing, what will success look like for you? And if you had to think about the skills that you have, what are those? And if that's what you're looking for, then you want to ask these other candidates how they possess what it is you're looking to replace. That would be probably one of my big ones. And then if as you grow and you have more people to be able to also interview, then to definitely include them in the process. So as we've grown, it's not just me interviewing now. There's multiple people because people ask different questions. They see things differently. The answers are different. And I believe in power of numbers.
Yeah. Great shares there. All right, Jodi. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on, spending time and sharing just a bit of your journey here today. As you mentioned, you have resources for people on your website, articles. And so if people just want to learn more about you, your company, your work, where's the best place? What's the URL for them to go to?
Our website is redcloveradvisors.com. And I also spend a lot of time in LinkedIn and would love to hear from you all there.
There we go. All right. Well, we will include all that at the show notes at consultingsuccess.com. Jodi, thanks again.
Thank you.
And there you have it for today's episode between Jodi and Michael. If you enjoyed today's podcast, then be sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to today's show. And if you want to help support this podcast, I'd encourage you to share this podcast out with a friend or colleague. Also, a reminder to visit Jodi's episode page over at consultingsuccess.com, where there you're going to find everything referenced in today's episode, including how to connect with Jodi on LinkedIn, visit her website, get a copy of her book, plus so much more. And lastly, how to book your complimentary growth session call. You can do so either on that page or again, visit consultingsuccess.com/grow. That's the end of the line for us this week. We're going to be back next week with another episode. Until next time.